Welcome back, everyone. Those who have been here before, those who are new, welcome here to Corda. This is our last event of 2015, and that'll make 14 years we've been doing this. It's been a great event for the community and a lot of the regulars who have been here. Stick around, we have some drawings afterwards. We've got an entertainment book and a beer mug and some things like that. So I will introduce to you our featured speaker, Campbell, who's a senior manager at Tableau, formerly at Microsoft, and he'll fill you in on the rest. But thank you for coming. Hello, everybody. Thank you for coming out on Veterans Day. On another wet, rainy Seattle night. So yeah, I'm Jamie Campbell. I'm at Tableau. And today we're going to be talking about combined engineering. I want this to be pretty informal, so if you have questions as we're going, feel free to chime in, observations, all that kind of stuff, all welcome. We'll see where we go. So first off, just a kind of quick disclaimer here. I worked at Microsoft for a long time. A lot of this deck is about Microsoft and my experience there. I'm at Tableau now. But none of this is Microsoft or Tableau's opinions. These are online. Kind of along those lines, you're going to get my viewpoint on kind of what I saw with combined engineering, but it's one person's viewpoint. And I'll try to kind of make clear some of my biases and kind of my background so that you kind of know where I'm coming from. And then also, just another disclaimer, there's no magic template in this talk. There's no, okay, I've seen the light, and here's what we all should do. But hopefully there'll be some good things to take away. All right, so like I said, I want to kind of start with my experience just to give you kind of that picture of where I'm coming from. I'm curious, how many people here have worked at Microsoft? Okay, so about half-ish. Yeah, there's a lot of ex-Microsofties in Seattle, especially in test. So if there's anything that I say that doesn't make sense to you, especially about the Microsoft stuff, let me know. That may be another one of my just biases of experience, expecting people to know it happening or something. So, okay, I've been in test a long time. This is what it looked like when I started. I've been in test for 17 years. So it has actually a long time. And I was thinking when I started, we'd talk about internet years, and is an internet year like 7 regular years or 5 regular years? But if you take 17 times any of those, you pretty much get that I'm old. So let's see. So when I started 17 years ago at Microsoft, I started on FrontPage 98, and I started as a software test engineer. And software test engineer, that was at the time kind of the cutting edge, kind of the mainstream kind of what testing was in the software industry. I'd say Microsoft was out kind of on the bleeding edge of that. But I was one of the very first computer science majors hired onto the team. So I was on a team of about 15 engineers, making up, in this software test engineer role, you could also think of as QA. So there were 15 of us. 2 of us had computer science degrees. We had 2 devs who wrote test framework stuff, and that were titled as SDETs, but it was they were hired, as devs, and it was kind of they reported through testing, but it was a separate thing. And our goal at this time was very much think like the customer. That was what we were focused on: is understand how the customers use the product, mimic that. Try to think of the things that the customers are going to hit before we ship the product. We talked a lot about things like the art of testing, and we really looked for that skill set of that ability to just break things, which probably a lot of people in this room have that magic touch. And we did a lot of things black box. There was a desire to understand kind of what was happening under the covers, but not at the code level. But just kind of, again, thinking from the customer perspective and understanding enough about what's going on to be able to read code bugs. And then heavily manual. We did do some scripting, and we were expected to be able to do some very basic scripting type of coding. But if you coded, that was you were kind of a special tester. What we were rewarded for. So at that time, it was really just load up the bug list. If you're loading up the bug list, you're going to get a review score, you're going to be seen as one of the best testers on the team, all that kind of stuff. And then we were working in the waterfall model. That was the thing back then, and it was 2 to 3 year ship cycles. We do big, long coding cycles, hand off a bunch of code to test, find a bunch of bugs, and just rinse like the And so this was my first 5-ish years at Microsoft. And around 2002, oh, actually, before we jump there, so just kind of a quick book that kind of was popular at the time. So, like I said, we talked a lot about the art of testing. This was the very first book I got when I started in testing. I don't know, a lot of people have seen this book. You can tell from the cover, it's an old book. And I actually found, I don't know if anybody's memorized the 12 principles from it or has looked at it recently. As I was prepping for this, I was flipping back through it and remembered it has principle number 2, which is a programmer should not test their own program, which I thought was interesting in the context of combined engineering. So, and there's some disclaimers in there about don't apply these principles by the letter. But, okay, so like I said, that was my first 5 years at Microsoft. Around that time, Microsoft made the decision that QA was not a role that they wanted to continue to have, and that we were not going to have testers who were purely black box, think like the customer testers, that we wanted to move to a model where everybody was able to write code, writing automation in C#, C++, and we changed the title. We said we're not software test engineers, we're software design engineers in test. And the devs were software design engineers. And so, like I said, the background here was that we really were consciously trying to move in a more technical direction. And the talk started changing from, how do we find all these bugs after developers check them in to how do we push quality upstream? And really we spent the next decade trying to figure that out. And we learned a lot along the way. I don't know that we ever got great at it, but that was that was kind of the idea. And we started with like, okay, well, we're writing automation now. We're going to write tons of automation, and then it was like, okay, well, can we get unit tests done? That kind of thing. And like I said, so the goal was kind of just automate as much as possible, minimize the amount of manual test cases you have to run, and try to get to a world where we're able to quickly determine the state of the build. And so the testers started getting rewarded for different things at this time. So it was no longer going to get you a great review score to log a ton of bugs. It was going to get you a great review score to write a ton of automation or check in a cool automation framework or a test tool. And so you started seeing testers are savvy. Like, if you reward us for that, we're going to do more of that. And so I think we lost our way a little bit in this time frame in terms of focusing on the customer perspective. But we'll talk about that some more. And then we were still waterfall at this point, still in office on a 2 to 3 year ship cycle, and just starting to kind of dip our toes a little bit into Agile with a lowercase a here, but mostly around things of like, hey, instead of like a 12-week coding milestone, what if it was like 4 weeks? Which I don't know if that counts as Agile, but at least it's headed in that direction. So that was my kind of that next decade at Microsoft. And then the book that I would say, this is, you can pick any of a number of books, but Mark Tuster, Dorothy Graham's automation book's a good one. But this is what we were reading, books about automation. You could easily have put a C++ book here. It's all about like let's get better at writing code. Okay, so summer of 2014. the big bang. So this is summer 2014 at Microsoft. We kind of looked at where we were at and said, hey, like we've been on this path of getting more and more technical. Like maybe we're just at the point where we don't need separate roles. We could have everybody just be a dev or an engineer. And so that's the change we made. And that's what the bulk of this talk is going to be about. And so just to give a kind of a little bit of background there, like I said, everybody's an engineer, therefore everyone owns quality. There isn't a set of folks, and you could argue everybody owns quality all along. That's a good argument. But we decided to kind of make that official. Like, hey, there is no backstop for you. You check in code. If the code's crappy, that's your fault. Like, you're responsible for testing the code that you check. And pushing that quality check upstream went full upstream at that point, where we're talking about, okay, well, if you're checking the code that you're checking in, that means you're checking in unit test, maybe you're doing TDD, things like that. But we're going to rely heavily on writing code to check the code that the product code that you wrote, and then telemetry. And so this idea that we can also know like what bugs customers are hitting, and we'll talk more about that too. But that was kind of the big bet was, hey, if we push everything into unit testing, we have great telemetry, we can get the same level of quality or better with everybody in this role. And at this point, a good thing I think is the focus shifted from, hey, like, let's talk about these things like bugs or automation that are kind of side effects that are trying to get to quality, to talking about like, hey, like, are we getting features, shipping value to our customers? And so I think, probably the thing that's missing from this slide is it should be shipping high quality features. That's not actually always what we were working for, but shipping features was definitely the thing that we were really working for. Yeah.
Kind of in that discussion.
Yeah.
So what place in that discussion was you need to make testable code?
Yeah.
There was some of that in kind of the STEP realm. You need to make more testable code. This really is.
Yeah, and that's a great question, and I'll talk about that a little bit more. But yeah, like that was some of the reasoning, behind the change was that, hey, if you want to write, if you have to test your own code, you're going to be more conscious of writing testable code up front. And anytime, it's two people having that conversation, it's a little back and forth. So, cool. And then, at this point, we moved into more of a regular agile world with monthly sprints and rapid deployment and all of these good things that the industry's heading towards. So this was the change that I went through. Like I said, this is going to be what the bulk of what I talk about. And if I had to pick one book to kind of highlight this time frame, it's the Lean Startup. I don't know how many people are familiar with Lean Startup. Okay, so Lean Startup is basically this idea of, for startups, trying to get your concept out as fast as possible, getting feedback as fast as possible, and iterating and tightening that loop as tight as you can get. And so, this was kind of what everybody was thinking with the move to Agile and this idea that, hey, you're writing code, you're writing the test, and it can go out the door, and then we'll get feedback of whether it's good or not, and we'll fix it. So, and this is the thing that we were talking about in terms of cloud engineering. So, just to kind of recap that, like, this is the evolution question mark that I saw. We kind of started with STA, dev. On that continuation of we're writing more and more code, we're becoming closer and closer to what a dev is. I don't know what goes here. That would be an interesting conversation.
Data scientist.
Data science, maybe, yeah, or if the code like generated itself, and then cool. And this would be an awesome slide to like jump right into the next, like, hey, let's talk about combined engineering. But there's a little bit of coda that I want to talk about first, which and first we got this guy who's now shifted his mentality to ship all the features from find all the bugs. But the coda is that about 6 months ago, I left Microsoft and went to Tableau. And that's been an interesting experience because Tableau has not shifted to combined engineering, and in some ways is completely back in a different world than what I was doing at Microsoft. And so at Tableau, we actually have two different test roles. We have quality assurance engineers, and then software engineers in test. And so you can pretty closely map the quality assurance engineer to the old STE role that I talked about when I started at FrontPage, and then the software engineer and test role to the SDET role that was kind of right before we went to combined engineering. So at Tableau we have both. That's been interesting to go back into that world and see kind of how that works. And I don't talk about that too much in this talk, but I'd be happy to share thoughts on that as well.
Well, and in some ways, isn't Microsoft still a little there? But those are contractors.
Yeah, good question.
Yeah, they still have a lot of STEs. They're just not working directly from Microsoft. Microsoft.
Yeah, well, and it depends on the team. You know, there are definitely teams that have a lot of STs, but at least in my world at Microsoft, we had there was no backfill. There was no contracted out work. There were no contractors on staff. Like, it was the dev team and the products going out the door.
Gotcha.
So, cool. And then at Tableau, we, our goal on everything is QSF, which is quality schedule features in that order. And so anytime you're making priority decisions, this is the framework we use, which is cool. And then and we have kind of a hybrid approach. So my dev test ratio at Microsoft was always one dev to one tester. Over the years, it started to move maybe closer to like 2 devs to 1 tester. At Tableau, we don't really have a set number there. It's up to each feature team to decide kind of the right mix of dev and test and QA and software engineer. So, so you'll see on a team that has a lot of UI, we may have a lot of quality assurance engineers. On a team that's pure APIs, like we may have a very small test team. That's kind of where we're at. And then we're doing agile and frequent releases and all that kind of stuff too. So this can work in the modern agile world. Cool. I don't have a book for this yet. The books I'm reading now are all about data, because that's a new world to me. But yeah, back to the future a little bit for me. Okay, so now that we kind of have set that background, let me talk to you about kind of what I saw in the combined engineering world. So first, I thought this may be the slide that gets me in trouble too. Like, this debate's been going on for a decade at least, but like this question of like, do testers have to write code? How much should testers write code? And I was going to stick a whole bunch of slides on, or quotes on here. Like, even when I was sitting in the coffee shop before I walked over here, I was reading some posts on LinkedIn where people were having this debate again today. And there's good arguments on both sides, and and so you can easily construct this smorgasbord of arguments for and against having technical testers. But so I was going to go build all these quotes, and then I found this Ministry of Testing blog post from a couple of years ago that they'd already done it. So yeah, if you're not familiar with that background, feel free to go out and click on this link. But yeah, like if you kind of think of that spectrum, we're going to have QA kind of in that separate like front page style that I started with. That's like the far end of one spectrum, and then I would say when we talk about combined engineering, like that's the other end. It is the testers are devs. So, but yeah, like I said, this is part of a long-standing conversation. So, and then just to give kind of a visualization of what this looks like, we have dev, test, smaller PM team, a bunch of other roles that are either part of the feature team or not part of the feature team. What we did was basically just move all those testers into the developer role, and then we titled them engineers in hopes that that might make everybody feel like, hey, it's not just a dev thing. This is interesting, partly to show off my cool PowerPoint skills. One second. And then partly the other interesting piece of it is what combined engineering wasn't, at least in the context of this, my experience. So we did not move ops in with the test team. We didn't get rid of PM. We didn't, this was purely dev and test coming in.
So I'm wondering when you say kind of combine them, meaning for a given engineer, they would be expected to both do dev and manual and automated testing, or?
Yeah, that's right. So you would basically, if you worked on a feature, you would be responsible for writing the product code for it, writing the unit tests for it, doing the manual validation, and then when you check it in, saying, hey, this is ready to ship to customers. So, now, sometimes we would get, if your feature team is like 3 or 4 folks, you may, divide up some of that work of like, hey, I'm going to write the unit test, but can you maybe do a test pass for me?
Right.
That kind of thing. But it wouldn't be somebody who, that's just, they might have stopped writing their product code to help you with your testing. Cool. Okay. So why did we do this? Like I said, you can make good arguments on a lot of different cases. The rationale for our team going to this model, first one here was recruiting and retaining folks. So one thing we started to see is it's always been hard to hire testers, especially like out of college. I think there are very few colleges that have software testing programs or software testing degrees. And I don't think anybody, or only some very small set of special people, go to college of like, I'm gonna go to college and be a software tester. Everybody goes to college and think they're gonna be a developer. And so, we'd go to campus and we would try to recruit, and it was often kind of this swimming upstream problem of, you're talking to somebody who thinks they want to be in dev and you're trying to convince them how cool testing is, and we're writing code and we're solving hard problems. And so, that was hard both in selling the role at Microsoft when we were talking to folks who were interested in Microsoft. They would be like, okay, I'm only interested in dev, and so we're trying to sell them against the dev team. But over the last 4 or 5 years, it had gotten tough to sell against other companies as well, where other companies would come in and say, hey, we'd like to hire you for this role. You'll be writing, perf automation, and you'll be a dev on the perf team. And and we'd come in and say, hey, we got this role. You'll be a tester on the perf team. You're writing perf automation, and they take the dev role. And so partly, the idea was, hey, what if we just had the same title? Like, if that was the only change we made, it had the same title, like, would we be able to recruit people there? And so, there was a theory that actually would help. And then also retaining folks, just from the standpoint of, it was often the case that we had testers, I'd say like maybe 10% of our best testers were always wanting to switch over to dev, and often would leave one team to go to another team, sometimes just to get that title, even if the technical work they were going to be doing was no different than what they were doing on the team they were on. So recruit, retain. The next one here, efficiency. I think we were hitting on this one a little. There's this idea that if you're one dev and you're writing product code and you're digging deep and you've written the unit tests and you really understand that area, that at the point where you're ready to say, okay, this thing's ready for testing, you now introduce a second human being who you have to then go through that same learning experience, learn those same things. If there's test hooks that they want or don't know about, you have to have a conversation about that. And so there was.
Isn't that the point?
It can be, yeah. So it can be the point. The question though was like, are you getting better testing by having those two people there, right? And for something like test hooks, maybe not, right? This back to the 12 principles of testing, right? Yeah, it is nice to have somebody who didn't write the code and didn't think of that error condition, looking at that code and not be kind of biased by the thinking process that they had in the first place. But yeah, so this, again, these were kind of the arguments given to our team of like why we're moving to combined engineering. And so, there were various kind of estimates of like how much of an efficiency gain we would get, but 20 to 50% was some of the numbers that I heard. So that's the efficiency argument. Effectiveness, this one's tough. Like, I think, one of the challenges of testing has always been, what are we getting, what's the return on investment of, especially if we have just as many testers, we have a 1-to-1 dev test ratio, what's the return on that test investment? And I spent a lot of my time trying to convince, the managers in my organization of like, hey, look at what we're getting done with tests, and look at quality, but it's somewhat hard to quantify, right? And I think from a dev perspective, there was always kind of this feeling that maybe we weren't as efficient as we could be. And so I don't know if that could be there could be truth to that. It could also be just kind of a perception problem, but I think there was this idea that like, hey, if we were combined, we could do it better. Deployment. So this is another everybody's well aware now, app stores, deploying products at the cloud, deploying things is just way easier now than it was 10 years ago. And so in this world where you can get a fix from your build system to the customer faster, the cost of a bug goes down. And so there was this idea of, hey, like we're in this world now where if we hear about bugs, like we can get the fix out. It's another one where like, do you want the customers finding bugs or do you want to find bugs? But yeah, that was the idea. And then telemetry, kind of going right along with that, this idea that we are also in a world now where we have the ability to collect data from customers, get that up to our servers, do analytics on that, and find out like not just what bugs are we finding in testing, but what things are customers actually hitting on their machines. And so if we were really good at that and we could get the bug fixes out right away, like, hey, like maybe that window of how long a bug is in the world is so small that doing upfront testing doesn't make as much sense anymore. And that if that testing is small, then we don't need a separate discipline. And then the last one, I don't think they didn't give us this trendy, but there was an element of that too. And I know like we did a survey of like what are other companies doing, and a lot of companies don't have separate test teams, and so I think as we were looking kind of it kind of ties a little bit into the recruitment thing, but like how do we make Microsoft kind of a cool place to work? There was a little bit of a like maybe we should be doing more of the things that other companies are doing. So and then also this was a good excuse to put Taylor Swift in my day. So which I have a 5-year-old daughter who thought that was cool. So okay, how do we actually roll this out? So we basically just threw everybody in the pool. So the decision was made of, okay, we're going to combine engineering, and a couple weeks later, like we rolled it out.
Got a question.
Yeah.
And it's based on your orange slide that you gave earlier, but you don't have to switch to it. I'm curious, as you talk about rolling this out, who owns delivery? I saw the PM flying out there, but you've also got this combined larger team. So in your model, if you could touch on that real quick.
Okay, sure. So delivery in terms of deciding when the product goes out, or actually pushing the product out, or staying on schedule?
The feature. Who's accountable for delivering the feature?
For delivering the feature. So the feature teams, which is the devs really, and we were actually.
It's everyone in that circle. You said the devs, so the devs.
Yeah, the engineers.
The whole
yeah. And so you're responsible for it, and we were actually moving to a model where that PM circle was getting smaller too, and was becoming more of a business focus. Like, are we building the right features and putting the right things on the backlog? And the engineers were owning the how much can we get done in a sprint? Like, are we breaking things down at the right granularity? Like all of that was, we don't need somebody outside the engineering team to tell us how to do it. Was kind of the thinking. So those changes were kind of happening in parallel.
Okay.
But yeah, so like I said, we basically made this decision and decided instead of having like a big long, hey, we're going to go put everybody through a training program and we're going to spend a bunch of time, like we just said, we're going to make the change and we're going to figure out how to do it on the fly. And we did do some stuff. It wasn't completely like, so good luck. We gave everybody a mentor, so devs and testers paired together, both to teach how to test and to teach how to write product code. And then we did, obviously, the testers who were dipping their toes into writing product code, we didn't say, hey, go architect the network stack or something. They started on smaller features. And then another interesting piece here is we took about half of so I was the test manager at the time, we took about half the testers and moved them into this, engineers on the same team I was on, so the team grew. We took about half the testers and moved them off into a telemetry world. So about half became basically data analysts and about half went to the engineering world. So back to my orange slide, like you could actually shrink that circle, and we'll talk a little bit more about that too. Cool. Okay. So yeah, so we did all of this. What happened? It's complicated. Like most things, there's no easy answer, but we'll talk through some of the pros and cons. This is what a lot of the testers thought was going to happen. It's a zombie apocalypse. There's going to be blood in the streets. We're important, and if you take our role away, like the world's going to just end. And we actually this was something we had to be really careful about because it's a natural human reaction to feel like, hey, you took away with this thing and it was important, and like, you don't understand. And so we had to coach the test team, especially on, as we're going through this change, like we need it to be successful. Like we need everybody to be good engineers, or the team's gonna fail, the company's gonna fail. And so while it might be fun to watch the zombie apocalypse, like it's our jobs to make sure that doesn't actually happen, and it didn't. And then, so as I was working on this, we have this Viz of the Day thing on Tableau Public, which this is complete non sequitur, but where we post cool vizzes that people built. And so I put that picture in, and then like right in my inbox popped a viz somebody built of the zombie apocalypse. And I won't pull this up, but basically you can hover over, and somebody crunched a bunch of data about like where you would actually be most likely to survive this zombie apocalypse. Kind of cool. Seattle, 6th best city to survive zombie apocalypse. So depending on your, how much risk you're willing to take.
Vampires from Forks are going to take care of?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, it's a crazy war.
Get on a boat. All the sound.
That's true. And then, this is, I think, what our upper management thought would happen. Like, we'll roll this out and life's just going to be awesome. And, that is what happened now. Obviously, that didn't quite come to fruition either. And really, the other thing I would say is, like, we'll talk through some of the stuff, but a lot of it, I would say, is still very much TBD of whether it's working. There were things that went okay. There were things that didn't, and it's going to take, I think, years before we really see whether it works, and if some of the old model comes back. Okay, so what was actually going well? Testers writing product code. This was, again, one of those things that people were pretty nervous about. We have testers, they've been writing, for us, our testers were writing C#, our product code was in C++. There was the question of like, hey, like we're gonna put these folks who haven't been writing product code into the product code, like, are they gonna write good code? Are they gonna be capable of producing features? And the answer ended up being, yeah, actually the testers did great. And so, this was, we had SDETs, so, we've been for a long time looking for developer skills as we were hiring testers. But it turned out that, kind of that difference between where our hiring bar was in terms of coding for SDET and where dev was not that different. And actually, the testers, in some ways, maybe weren't as good at some of the kind of architectural stuff, but they had that, like, when I write code, I actually validate my code. So they were actually writing really good code. So that all went a lot better than expected. And I mentioned the kind of 50-50 thing. We didn't cherry pick. We didn't say we're going to take the 50% that's like the strongest developing testers and put them in the dev role and the others in the data analyst role. We actually just did it by reporting structure. So 2 teams went off to engineering, 2 teams went off to data analysts, and then we kind of had a couple of little swaps where people had real strong preferences for one or the other. And the data analyst thing actually had a fair amount of coding associated with it too, which is the reason most people were cool with going either way. Dev zoning automation, we talked a little bit about, hey, if you actually have to write the automation, like you care more about putting in test hooks, you care more about, thinking about whether the code is testable from the first place. And devs were learning a ton. It was great for us from coming from the test background to see devs taking a lot more interest in the automation framework and our tooling. And then bringing their knowledge and skills to helping us make those tools better. And so that was a very positive part of the change. And lots of healthy conversations, and surprising conversations in some places where you'd have a developer maybe asking, we have tests for that, or how does our test system work? Or these things that you kind of just assumed everybody on the team knew. But they were good conversations to force. Writing more testable code, we basically touched on. There was some experimenting with TDD and things like that, which was cool. Again, you tell somebody, hey, you need to test this, they're more open to trying out new techniques like that. And then cross-team bug bashes. We were actually doing these before combined engineering, where we would take the whole team and get everybody in a room together and test the product. And it was awesome because the devs were learning, we were finding bugs right on the spot, and there was a lot of good just kind of conversation of, like, hey, why does this work this way? And you can, kind of peel the onion, real time. And so we'd had a lot of success with those. After moving to combined engineering, they became just essential because, when we had a test team, we had time to go do testing, and we, testers were expected to be in the product and kind of making time to go and test. In this new world, it was, test the code you're writing, but there wasn't a lot of time for, like, go just be in the product. And so these bug bashes became kind of the proxy for that. And I think we probably should have, we were doing it once a month, I think that probably wasn't good enough. We started this thing called monthly service reviews, which was to once a month get together and review the telemetry we had for the product. And that was also a real, well, it's actually to not review the telemetry, but review the metrics we were seeing through the telemetry. So things like, how stable is the product? Like, how are we going to measure that? Okay, like, we're going to, track crash ratio. Well, what should the crash ratio be? And so having those monthly service reviews really got us, thinking about, like, what are, in this world where we collect this data, like, what data do we need to know if the product is high quality or not? And we were, kind of scratching the surface on that when I transitioned out. But that meeting was super helpful, just even prepping for it. And then feature velocity. So in terms of pace, so like I said, we ended up going from 1-to-1 test ratio, combining, taking about half the test team out. So team about 75% of the original size. We were producing basically the same amount of features per sprint, per quarter. And so, arguable of whether the quality was the same, and we'll talk about that some more, but just in terms of pure, like, are we getting through our backlog, of product coding? Yeah, we were getting through the same backlog with a smaller set of folks. So that, was a success, and kind of validated some of the questions about, like, how much efficiency are we, losing from kind of these extra conversations. What wasn't going so well? So I mentioned quality. Build quality was good. It was not as good, and was much more up and down. So we had a set of automation, but automation failures weren't getting investigated at quite the same pace, and tests were. We had this good system in some ways where if a test is failing too much, it gets automatically turned off, and then the tester would be required to turn it back on. But the devs didn't know that when they picked up automation, or they, and like people were so busy they didn't have much. So a lot of automation just was kind of slowly getting turned off and not getting re-enabled. So build quality was going down, and then we had kind of this double whammy of build quality is going down. Yet when you run your bug, queries, it's like, hey, like bugs are looking awesome. There are very few active bugs. Because it was actually testing and logging. Yeah, it was the old, like, how do you make a bug count down? Send the test team on vacation, right? So that was a big problem we were trying to address. Telemetry maturity. So I mentioned, like, hey, we got analytics, we got telemetry, but and all that stuff is coming and is it's getting better and better every day. But at least from where we were at, like, we weren't really in a world where we could say, like, oh yeah, we understand what's going on in the world, what problems customers are encountering with the product, just based on our telemetry. Like, we had some insight of, like, does the product crash a lot, but like what kinds of errors people are hitting, or kind of these more subtle things, or like trying to understand, like, verbatim feedback where somebody's just sending, like, comments, like, the tools around that kind of stuff were still very raw. And so, the monthly service reviews were good, but they weren't really telling us, like, how is the user experience. And then, rapid deployment, I put rapid-ish deployment in here. So, I think if you're working in the cloud, and you can deploy multiple times a day, like, you're in a world where you can turn these things around pretty fast, and you own that environment. The product I was working on was a client product, and we were in the App Store. But getting things out to the App Store, while way faster than what we used to be, is still not like an instantaneous thing. So you have to submit it through the App Store approval process. Like, that can take a while. it goes out to the App Store, and then customers actually have to go find it or wait for their auto download to kick in. And so like if you ship a bad bug, it can sit on the customer's machine for a week before they actually see the update, even if you just jump on it right away and fix it. So, and there's some things around, like if you ship like a security bug or something, you can get an update pool, but they're pretty. Most of the app stores are pretty strict about what you can and can't do. So, so we with our betas and stuff, we had some pretty bad bugs that we weren't able to kind of instantaneously fix in the way that we would have if it was a cloud build. And then adding new automation. So like I said, a lot of our existing automation was starting to kind of decay a little bit. And we were writing unit tests, but not really writing any tests at any higher level than that. Yeah, integration, component tests, UI tests, like there was not much kind of happening in those levels. And with the way the kind of work was structured, you pick up a feature off the backlog, and you write that, and you test the thing that you just wrote, and you check in. But like nobody really had that like big picture of like how does this integrate with everything else. So, and I don't know what would have happened. Like it's interesting. We were a year and a half into like a 2 or 3 year project when we made this change. And so we built an automation framework, and we had this suite of tests, and we had test libraries and all these things. And so we inherited all of that kind of to start this combined engineering shift. In a world where we had started from scratch, it would have been interesting to see how we could have to go off and build those same things, or if those things would have got built at all. So yeah, system testing. So that's kind of the same thing we were just talking about. Like there was nobody who really had any time to go off and look at the system and test and try to find bugs. And so we were fully dependent on dog food usage and beta feedback. And
Did you say the problem was?
And the bug bashes. So I was working on Outlook for Windows 10. Yeah, and like I said, like I don't want to overplay some of these things too. Like it wasn't the zombie apocalypse. Like we were shipping updates out to the App Store. We had lots and lots of real world users, and for the most part, like the product worked. Like like it wasn't a complete disaster, but it was kind of like, is this at the quality level it would have been with the test team or not? And quality also, like if we're delivering features at the same pace or faster, like had we kept the entire test team, like I think we could have actually delivered more features. Then you're into that question of like trade-off of like, okay, well maybe there's more bugs, but there's also more features, and is that better meeting the customer need or not? So there's there's interesting arguments on those sides here. This peripherals, I don't know what the right word for it is, but basically all the things that aren't just does the thing work, really hard to figure out how to get that stuff done. Like when you do localization testing, when you go and look at configs, that's always like, let's go get the config lab set up and spend, testers spend a lot of time on those kinds of things, and they basically like went out the door, and to a large extent they became, well, if we have config issues, we'll see them in the forums or we'll hear feedback through other channels, and maybe we can pick like one to do the bug bash on. So, and then retaining and evaluating talent. So for the most part, like again, not zombie apocalypse, we didn't make the change to see all the test team leave or anything like that. But we did start to see impact of it for sure. And we had a lot of the experienced testers who, did actually love being testers and liked working on automation frameworks and liked working on testing. They had other opportunities and companies that were hiring testers. And so we lost some of the best testers, and many of whom were doing a great job as devs, but because they just wanted to do testing, which was interesting. It was sort of my story. And then we also, we did have some, it wasn't the case that every tester who we said, okay, now you're responsible for writing product code. Most of them were successful at that. Not everybody made that transition successfully, and so There was also folks who were kind of being pushed out because they weren't good devs. And then evaluating talent, this was an interesting thing too that I think didn't go so well, where the focus was so much on delivering the features and writing product code that we didn't have a lot of kind of support for testers to like if you wanted to go write an automation framework, it was kind of like, you're probably not going to get the highest rewards because we're going to look at how much product code did you write, how much product code did this other engineer write, and we're going to reward the product code more than the automation framework code. And so, again, testers are savvy, and so the tester said, aha, I will not touch anything that looks like test because I need to make this transition and be a good product coder. And then the devs kind of, they weren't really incented to go off into that test world, and so, they were told, hey, you need to learn these test skills. They knew that they could kind of stay in their wheelhouse and continue to get rewarded. So I think that was a piece that didn't go well. And then making time for test investment. This one was one of the biggest challenges for me. So in this transition, so I was a test manager, I became an engineering manager, I started managing devs and testers. And I found it really challenging because we had a schedule, we had a set of features we needed to deliver. And we had to make these trade-offs of like, okay, I've got the devs on my team and I've got this feature I've got to build, and like, man, I really need to go fix up a bunch of automation stuff, and go build some of these things. And so I'd like to carve off like 2 or 3 engineers to go work on that, but the math doesn't work. Like to deliver these features, like I've got to put everybody on the feature work. And so I found myself making these hard trade-offs of like, okay, I'm not going to focus on these quality things right now because I got to hit these other deliverables. And so we didn't kind of have, like when we had the title, it was easy to say like, oh, well, you want a tester to go write product code for a sprint. That's, like, let's talk about that. That's not kind of the norm. Where in this world, it was very easy to just kind of say like, oh yeah, sure, everybody's writing product code this sprint. So, okay. So this is the combined engineering curve. So this just kind of came out, and this is, you saw my mad PowerPoint skills, these are my mad paint skills. I talked to a bunch of teams who had gone through combined engineering before my team, and this is kind of the story that most of them told is, they had testers and the quality was good, and then they moved to this model and they slowly saw the product kind of decay to a point where they hit some crisis of like, we're getting bad reviews, or the VPs are freaking out, or something where the whole team kind of gets religion, realizes that they need to take this seriously, and then figures out how to be effective in this combined engineering model. So I call this the pit of despair. I left around here. So to be fair, a lot of the story that I'm telling is colored by that, and so you should be aware that there is more to the story, I'm sure. Talking with folks, I think like I said, this is a multi-year thing. Like they're not out of this pit of despair yet. And then the other interesting piece of this is all the teams that I talked to that had gone through combined engineering were service-oriented teams. And so I was never able to find a team that shipped desktop software that had gone through this. And so I had this theory that this may not happen either as fast or maybe even at all for desktop, but I don't have a lot of data to back that. So that's kind of the story of what I saw. So kind of what's next. First of all, I'm terrible with predictions, so don't invest in my stock choices and take that into account when I talk about this. But I think the things we need to be thinking about is use the right tool for the right job. Testers aren't tools, but basically, like, I don't think there is one model that works everywhere for every product, and I think actually, like, that's true not just across like the industry, but it's true within companies. It may be true within features. It may be true across sprints. Like, the makeup of your team doesn't have to match some template, and we need to kind of get out of thinking that there's one formula that we should all be following. And I was playing around with that just a little bit, again, with my crazy MS Paint skills here. But I think there's some sort of kind of quadrant thing here of like, how fast can you get things out to customers? What's the cost to your company of shipping a bad bug? And if you're like a startup and you don't have a big customer base yet, and you're just starting to build your brand, and you're like, man, go fast. Like, be in that lean startup mode. You probably don't even need a test team at all. If you're over here, like, and this is where I think Office and Tableau and a bunch of other companies are, where we're deploying much faster than we used to, but it's still quarterly, monthly, that kind of cadence. And it's a big deal to us. Like, we don't want our customers hitting bugs. We want to find as many of those as we can before they do. So I think having a big focused testing team over here makes sense. And then you can kind of construct stories here around maybe you're in the cloud and your Salesforce, and so bugs are expensive, but you can fix them really fast, or you're an IT department. But I think there's kind of different factors that you need to bring into play here. Specialization is good. So I was telling the story of like, so we made everybody engineers and told them to write product code, but that's not right. Like I think you need to be able to. We need to be able to say like you can be regardless of your title. I think we need somebody who cares about the automation framework. We need somebody who is good at finding bugs, who likes writing test code. Yeah.
So did Microsoft have a separate team for doing security testing?
Yeah, that's a good one. There was still, so they got changed in terms of title and same sort of thing. But yeah, they have always been kind of a special team, and so I think they're like you were still getting rewarded for like pen testing and finding bugs, and but title wise, no different.
How about performance?
Performance. So performance, we basically said, hey, everybody's a dev, and like you'll get credit for fixing perf bugs, and so you should be able to both identify the perf bugs and then go fix them, which actually ended up being really hard for like I think those are two different skills, but we kind of ask people to do both. But yeah, so like I said, I think the things that we need to do to ship high quality products aren't going away, and we should have people who are good at these things grow those skills and make everybody feel rewarded and respected for what they're good at. That said, we do need to be more cross-functional. Like one of the good things about this was, like testers can fix bugs and devs can write automation. And in the past, sometimes we've made that line too much of a solid thing. And I think, especially as we're moving to Agile and we're trying to go faster, like there's times where you need to blur those lines and help out. Yeah.
So I always have trouble with the word, and you've used it a lot.
Yeah.
Trying to focus on automation.
Yeah.
Is automation writing software that create a test, or is it writing the test as well?
Can you repeat that?
So to me, personal opinion, automation is merely writing software.
Yeah.
Which is not testing. Testing
Right.
is figuring out what you want to write the software to do. It's designing the software or designing the test.
Yeah.
And so when you said automation just there, I wasn't sure which context you're coming from.
Okay, yeah, no, that's good. And yeah, kind of maybe back to like, I think
devs can write great automation.
Yeah. Well, and so, yeah, there's a bunch to unpack there. Like, I think devs can write great unit tests. Devs can probably write great component tests. I think systems level, kind of like how are you going to automate kind of at that end to end, and what's like the right stuff to do there is something where that's a specialty that a tester can do. And then with with having a test team, my goal for my test engineers is always that they're maybe spending like 75% of their time like building the automation framework and the tests that we need to validate things, so they can free up the other 25-30% of their time to just exploratory, use the product, find the bugs, like do the things that maybe you can't automate or you don't want to automate. So and that's a specialty too. And so when I say automation, like I don't want to lose the other pieces too.
Did the whole combined engineering process really, what mechanisms enforced that every dev needed to do unit testing? Was that a dictate or was that a?
Yeah, that's a good one. It was a dictate that you're responsible for writing the code that you need to, the tests you need to validate the code you're checking in.
Okay.
How that was enforced, we had code reviews. Most of the time, you would get caught in code review if you didn't do that. But not everything got it.
They didn't have coverage.
We would run code coverage metrics, and that was used to try to find things. But we also had code that was already in the product, and so and 100% code coverage was never a goal. So you always have to have somebody who's spending time going and looking through the code coverage that's missing and trying to understand, like, do we care about that? Yeah.
Kind of I guess a follow-up question. So you were a test manager.
Yeah.
Picking in a dev. There was also a number of dev managers picking a test.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure, what kind of differences did you see in approaches in talking to those?
Yeah, well, and it was a little, so in my org, so we also, in the process of doing this, flattened the org quite a bit, and about half the managers were no longer managers. And the half that were no longer managers were basically almost always the test managers. So it was, like me, a bunch of dev managers. Yeah, I mean, there were a couple of us, but yeah, so that was hard. Like I said, it was a challenge for me of, like, on the one hand wanting to be the, like, hey, I'm the quality guy, like, like, are we doing the right thing? But also wanting to embrace this new role, and also acknowledging that, like, hey, like, the thing we are being told we need to do is ship these features on this date, and like, there's the math reality of what we have to do. So, okay, so let me we're almost done. I'm happy to stick around and answer questions. But yeah, so I think the more that we're moving to a world where we can all help each other out, try not to be one-dimensional. When I was looking for this, I thought that One Dimension was the name of this band. And so I expected to find a bunch of images in One Direction. But, and then I managed to actually work One Direction and Taylor Swift into my day. So now I'm really, really happy. And then changing ratios, so we talked about this, like, I don't think 1-to-1's right in most cases, and I think those ratios could be kind of all over. And so find the one that works for your team, I think is the right model. And then I think, this is still coming, and like I said, it's not, for us it wasn't there yet, but like, I think as testers we need to figure out, like, how to use data to make us better at shipping high quality products, and how to use it to understand, like, are we testing the right things? Is our automation testing the right things? What are customers actually hitting in the real world, and do we understand that? And this is still very ripe, and it is a place where you can, testers need to learn how to use these tools, and in some cases, we need testers going off and becoming data analysts to bring that back around into testing, in my opinion. So, cool. So yeah, like I said, I'm happy to stick around, answer questions. Hopefully this is useful for you. Yeah,
kind of going back to another question.
Yeah.
You talked about earlier when these rules were developing and there were different incentives in place, like, writing more bugs or writing more automation.
Yeah.
Is there a way to incentivize a team that is pure devs into doing those things? Is any of that laid out, or is that part of the problem?
I think there probably are things you can do. And it was never kind of explicitly stated of, like, hey, like, you've got to write cross code. It was more of it was just kind of clear that was, like, people figured that out, just kind of based on behavior. But yeah, I think we could have done more to kind of say, like, I actually heard of one team that when they did this switch, instead of kind of throwing everybody in the pool, they said, hey, for the next sprint, testers are only writing product code and devs are only writing tests, and, like, same sort of thing. Like, we're going to throw you in the pool, but we're going to make you go off and like, feel the uncomfortableness equally, instead of just kind of throwing the testers into the product code. So, there's probably things there that you could do. And then, certainly stuff like the question about, like, how are you making sure that tests were getting written? Are those good tests? Through code review and stuff, you can kind of reinforce some of these things too. Like, hey, like, I noticed you're checking in all this code, but you never checked in any, not like your unit tests are much smaller, or you know your code coverage from that's much smaller, or like you never checked anything but unit tests. Like, have you ever thought about writing unit tests? Yeah. Anything?
I guess as you come into Tableau, and what
Yeah.
kind of team do you have now currently? Is it a
Yeah, so I have a kind of, so I'm mostly a test manager now. I have 2 test teams that report to me. Both are about like 6 or 7 people and made up of test engineers and QA. And we own 2 different feature sets. And then I have 1 team, which is currently just 1 dev, which is going to grow bigger. But for that, I'm going to actually have devs and testers. The model we're using at Tableau is that the frontline manager is on the feature team and is dev manager manages devs, test manager manages tests. The manager up from that is multidisciplinary. And so I'm kind of in that middle zone right now. So, which is, you know, I think a good, I think that's a good direction to head too, like having managers have kind of, you know, engineering managers who have insight into what's happening on both sides and can kind of make some of those balances and see like, oh yeah, now like we really do need more testers on this team, or we, you know, like we really should, you know, focus on the dev side or whatever.
So yeah, I think it's interesting that to make that change to go to the combined engineering, it seems like it might be able to work, but you have to be really careful. I think one of the things that I think was probably lost or maybe not even thought of, and I've seen this a lot in the industry in general, is people don't recognize that testing is a particular skill set, and there are people that are really good at testing. There's a particular skill set you need to be good at testing. And I think that would just go out the door in that situation.
Yeah, and I think you kind of hit on this earlier too. Like I spent lots and lots of times, you know, conversations like what was different. It's like when I talked to the dev managers, they very much had the perspective of, we just have to write really good unit tests, and the product will be great. You know, and like that's, you know, we got to get better at that. Like, you know, but devs can do that. Like, we can do it. And it was really hard to explain to them, like, you know, oh no, that's not going to get you all the way there.
Well, we just had a situation where we shipped a hot fix on my team last week, which I'm always horrified of. I mean, I'm the only tester on the whole team. But it turns out that I didn't feel as bad once I investigated where the bug came from, because it was a developer that had written the back-end code and then closed the story himself without sending it through test. So I didn't even realize that he had made that change in the code.
Yeah.
And his code worked fine. It was a simple change for him, but the front end had a bug in it, and it didn't work with his new back end code that he implemented. He didn't think to test the whole thing end to end. So it, you know, caused kind of a big issue on the front end that we quickly had to patch up. But I think that's the type of problem that you would tend to run into all the time without somebody that is looking at taking a step back and looking at the bigger picture.
Yeah, absolutely. And we had, you know, it's interesting, like if you log a bug in this world, the developer who fixes it closes it. Like, and, you know, they make their check-in and it was kind of like, if you want to, you know, if you care about that bug, like you need to just, you know, go back and check on it in a few weeks. And like, you know, like if you wanted to do something when that bug's done, like, you know, you have to kind of, you know, find a way to kind of subscribe to it. But yeah, there was no backstop on bug fixes either. Which is interesting, you know, and you would get the like, oh, I'm a dev over here and I'm filing a bug on this thing over here, and I never know what happens on it.
How did upper management decide to do it for the whole org? Organization versus was there like a small pilot test or something, or did they read had they read about something like case studies somewhere else, or
so a few things I think, you know, and like I said, all this with a big disclaimer. So there was the study, like they did go out and survey, you know, like a bunch of different companies and like, how do you do testing, how do you do your development process, and heard back that in a lot of cases like, hey, you know, we don't have testing, everything's fine. The other thing that I think happened is, you know, Microsoft's been going through a bunch of reorgs. A lot of folks that are in those kind of VP roles now came from service teams. And so they were in organizations where they were, DevOps, and they had very small test teams, and or they got rid of their test team altogether, and it worked just fine for them, and therefore they figured, this model should apply to any team. And then, it's nice to have a uniform, like, hey, we're gonna get rid of this role altogether. We don't have to have a separate career, description of what tests looks like, that kind of stuff.
Just a further comment on that. So this was actually done in Bing 3 or 4 years ago. And
Yeah.
Satya, who's now the head of Microsoft, came from Bing, and he was part of that instigation of that in Bing. And yes, Bing first did some survey of other companies. Bing was competing against Google and had Yahoo and everybody else. And they said, this is how everybody else is doing it. Facebook is doing it. We're going to do it that way.
Right.
So Satya at least had some experience with this.
Yeah. And if you go to my kind of pit of despair, like I said, anybody that talked to teams that had gone through it, would tell you a similar story of what they heard back. And there's danger to that, I think, of so they roll it out, and I think as we're experiencing some of these problems, there's the oh yeah, that's cool. You guys are going through that learning curve, and so I think have to be very careful that they don't stay in that too long.
I was going to ask you, at the engineering manager level,
Yeah.
I mean, you start getting feedback about whether the feature set that's being delivered on a regular basis doesn't have high enough quality, and therefore, cut features and invest in quality, or cut features and invest in testing, or invest in testing and deliver more features. How do you sort of right the ship if what you're doing is delivering a lot of features and everybody's getting maximum compensation, but the quality's not there, and so the customer satisfaction goes down?
Yeah.
How do you keep that customer focused and keep your engineers happy?
Good question.
Delivering a feature is good. Delivering a feature that actually works really well, that's more important.
Yeah, and I think I don't think we got an answer to that. And some of this also, for context, we were working on basically a V1 of this App Store app, and so the biggest feature is get the thing out the door. And I think there was always kind of a feeling of we know we're in this mode, and we're going to get to the finish line. We're going to get out there, and then we're going to figure out how to do this better, kind of the next cycle. But the other aspect of that comes in though is there's not a bunch of bugs, so nobody's yelling at you about that. The things you get yelled at about are hey, we just got some big customer case come in, and then it's a crisis on that one issue.
Or somebody tweets. No.
Yeah, and so you just become very responsive to what people are hearing.
I want to add to that too. One of the things we found over at Accenture, and I know some of the teams at Microsoft have done this too, is asking the question, what is important?
Yeah.
That particular scenario to incentivize teams goes all the way to testing either in production or making the metrics that you're getting from production more important than the features themselves. In other words, if you can't measure production, that is a Sev 1 higher than anything else, and you will fix that because that is most important to you. And that mindset will trickle down into quality, relationally. It takes a while to get there.
Yeah.
Once you get there, the results can be rather dramatic.
I think the anecdotes I've heard from kind of how the team's trying to shift now are we have the App Store, so we have App Store ratings, and that's a nice single metric that you can use to try to drive. So it becomes this. We've got it. Our ratings this. We need to get it to this. How do we move that? And I don't know if that you can argue whether you're actually driving quality at that point or you're driving perceived quality. But it's at least a very understandable, focused goal for the team, and so that was kind of where they had shifted their focus after getting out the door. App stores are funny. You're fixing things people are complaining about, but it's not. You're fixing things that local people are complaining about.
So is that it? There's still plenty of time for mingling and networking, and then there's a couple of local places open around and everything. But
Nice job.